certain things to which we return at the same time year after year after year. And one of them is this focus on gratitude that we return to every November. We've seen how transformative it can be in history and tradition, in our own lives, in our own community. Because what it does is it combats one of the evolutionarily hardwired brain biases that we all carry around in our heads. Nature magazine posted a study recently. They've traced the origins of human life, the very beginning of our species, to the wetlands of the Zambezi River in what is now Botswana. Now, maybe that's true, maybe that's not true, but it was really interesting as I was reading about the study to think about this whole process, this you and me being present in this room together, online together. It started at a place. It started in a location. That might be Eden. That might be what Eden looks like. And then as we as a species were migrating from southern Africa to the Fertile Crescent and into the whole world, all along the way, our brains and our bodies were being shaped by natural selection. And one of those shaping forces was if we paid close attention to something negative, if we paid close attention to a predator or to a poison, then we lived. We did not die. And that being so, negative pay-attentioners passed along their genes to you and to me. But if we missed, or if we paid less attention to something positive, if we missed an opportunity for food or an opportunity to enjoy a beautiful sunset, well, yeah, we missed an opportunity, but even so, odds are we stayed alive. So not paying attention to negative was much more costly than missing something positive. Consequently, the positive not pay as much attention to-ers, they passed their genes along to you and to me, and we carry them inside of ourselves. So consequently, you and I and all the other human beings on the earth, we carry a hardwired bias, a negativity bias. That means that our default setting is to register negative experiences more easily, but also to dwell on them more, to churn over them more, to parse them out in our minds after they happen for much longer. So I read a psych term for this once. It's called positive-negative asymmetry. Now, the spiritual tradition may not have known how our neurons work, but they did know how to go about challenging these inherited brain biases that you and I carry. Taught us how to stand outside of those biases, how to see a bigger picture than they would dictate to us and help us to live bigger lives. Now, again and again, we are enjoined in our ancient texts to be grateful. Again and again, we are enjoined to be thankful. To bring intention to our looking and to bring in purpose to our noticing, to see what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. And we are taught, do it on purpose. Don't wait for gratitude to come upon you. Go out and intentionally stir yourself to gratitude. So it's an intentional discipline, gratitude is. It's the intentional discipline of thankfulness. Well, that's been the focus of our meditations this November, will be for next week as well. And I very much enjoyed catching up on the chat group this last week because I was off the phone the week before. The first week of November, we focused our gratitude on what is good and true and beautiful. Those were the pictures that you saw during the welcome. Gratitude for beauty that is all around us. And admittedly, if you live here in Raleigh, that was an easy week to be grateful for beauty. It has been extraordinarily beautiful here in town. The second week, we focused on our gratitude for people who have impacted us. And Carrie posted how grateful she is for a friend of 23 years. They bonded together during a very difficult time in her friend's life. He was coming out in a very unwelcoming family. And since then, they have spent 23 Thanksgivings together, walking together through hard times and through beautiful times, through the death of a mother, through a painful divorce, and to have friends like that, deep gratitude. Cindy also posted how she was stirring herself to intentional gratitude, thankfulness for many people here in our own community who have stood beside her as she's gone through the deconstructing of her religion, the deconstructing of her shadow side, her false self. Intentional gratitude for those who walked beside her as she was doing the work of self-awareness, deconstructing her Enneagram type to be freer of her core lie, deconstructing the stories that she tells herself that create the afflictive emotions, as she's done so many self-awareness practice pages with others in the community. Matt talked about how coming back to the gratitude practice as we do year after year has helped him to see the impact that people have had on his life that he had not noticed or had not paid attention to, had not made part of his understanding, family and teachers and friends who had impacted him over time. So we do this practice on purpose. We stand back from our brain biases that would tend to filter the good things out. We stand back from our unbalanced focus on the negative. We stand back and we begin to intentionally see what is there that we tend to not see that is good and true and beautiful. Well, here's the thing. The spiritual practice of intentional gratitude, it will impact our ability to be oneness people living in a two-ness world. It does impact our ability to be bridge builders. In the other group, the What Are You Thinking group, you can start to see why we're going to combine them because it gets a little confusing. After last week's lesson, Mariah posted about judgment. That's what we talked about last week. And she said, when I'm in judgment mode, I'm usually reacting to some kind of an interior upheaval that's going on, a feeling that's going on inside of me. And often that feeling, she said, is shame. Often that feeling is self-judgment. Well, that's what we explored last week. We saw how what we tend to do is project our own interior bad feelings onto some external person or some external circumstance so that we don't have to feel the bad feelings. It's a way of avoiding having to deal with the stuff that's churning going on inside. Well, it turns out that's a brain bias as well. It's the tendency to overestimate our own goodness, our own virtue, our own ability. We tend to overestimate those trends in ourselves, and we tend to underestimate them in the other. So we can project onto the other those negative feelings so that we don't have to look inside and deal with our own stuff. What we see by filtering these things out isn't true, but it is what our brains dictate to us that we do see. It has this tool that on board that helps us not have to deal with stuff that would be costly to deal with. And so it grants us a moment of respite, a moment of interior equilibrium when we can tell ourselves we are better than we actually are. We are better than they are, and they are actually worse than they really are, and we are definitely better than them. So psychologists call it illusory superiority as a brain bias. And if you think very hard, you can realize, yeah, that's going to keep us from being able to be oneness people living in a two-ness world. If we walk around carrying this illusory superiority thing in our guts, we're not going to be working on oneness very well. Overestimate our own character and the character of our tribe, underestimate the character of those who we deem the other. That is going to make us really bad at oneness work. So, brain biases, we got a bunch of them. A negativity bias, illusory superiority bias, confirmation bias, framing bias. We're a steaming, swirling mess of these evolutionary brain biases that helped us survive in the wetlands of the Zambezi River, but holding us back from a full life living here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And the spiritual practices were designed by those who've gone before us to help us get past these biases, to help us live above them, to help us see a bigger picture, help us stand back from our auto-thinking and our auto-acting and our instinctive reacting, to see a bigger picture and to live bigger lives. The spiritual practices help us become thought watchers. And what thought watchers do is they catch themselves going into autopilot thinking. Instead of being run by the instincts, we become observers of the instincts. Thought watching helps us catch the gap that Viktor Frankl talked about last week, the gap that exists between stimulus and response. And in that gap, we get to choose who we will be and how we will live. The spiritual practices help us access that gap and help us see that it's there and help us see that we are not our thoughts. Thoughts are just thoughts. We have them, but we are not them. And gratitude helps us not blindly follow our brain's negativity bias and not get caught into the downward spiral of that churning thinking in which we weigh negative thoughts more heavily than we weigh positive ones. And mindfulness helps us see all of these different biases when they kick in. And self-examination, it helps us know the interior landscape of our own particular biases, the stories that we tell ourselves, helps us spot them when they're happening. That's what all the spiritual practices do. They help us overcome the limits of instinct, help us overcome the limits of auto-thinking, help us overcome the limits of blind biases so that we can become oneness people living in a two-ness world. So in the What Are You Thinking chat group, I posted a story of my own this week about catching myself all cocked and aimed with a pithy remark in my head about somebody's bumper sticker. But here's what I didn't post. It was a little bit more than pithy words in my head. They actually came out of my mouth. And Denise was with me, and we were walking through a parking lot, and there were the snarky words coming right out of my mouth. But as soon as I said those words, these words came out right after them. Nope, I am pretty confident that is not the truest truth about that person who has that bumper sticker on their car. And I am also pretty confident that those words have no business coming out of my mouth. Now, the thing is, that's really good news. Because, sure, it would have been better if I'd not said the words. Yeah, it would have been better. It would have been even better still if I'd not thought the thoughts. But I did, and I am where I am. But seeing ourselves doing a mindless brain bias thing, I cannot overestimate how important that is, how big a deal that is. Seeing ourselves doing a mindless thing speaks very well of tomorrow. So I saw myself primed and ready to go. I saw those habit thoughts. I heard those habit words all queued up, all coming right out of my mouth. And the brain loop that we talked about last week, the mocking brain loop, yep, it was in there. I was able to then just reach the volume button and turn it down. And that, my friends, is total success. That's how you know we're doing well. When you say the snarky words, but then afterwards you see you said them. So these two guys, Hobbes and Rousseau. I mentioned early in this lesson how these two guys have profoundly impacted how we Westerners see human nature, Hobbes and Rousseau. Now, Hobbes was the pessimist, and he said that human nature is fundamentally wicked. It is only strong external controls from a strong central government that will help us tame the wickedness that is inherent inside of our human hearts. Rousseau was the optimist. He said that human nature is fundamentally good. Now, he wouldn't have said it this way, but what he was saying is carriers of divine breath, every one of us. He would have said carriers of the inner light, every one of us. He would not have agreed with Augustine. He would have agreed with the Hebrew tradition. But here's the thing. In Western civilization, Hobbes won the debate. Westerners believe him. They don't believe Rousseau. Now, upon closer inspection of history and the soft sciences and the hard sciences, Hobbes may have won the debate, but he was wrong. I told you this would be a great companion book for this lesson. If you read it, you will learn how profoundly the debate between those two guys has impacted all of the instincts that you and I bring to raising our kids, how we live in our homes, how we do our schools, how we manage the workplace, even how we organize our churches, how we organize our spiritual communities. Living in a historical moment as hyper-polarized as this one, and having this mission set before us as we do to build bridges, and being inflamed ourselves by the polarization of the moment as we are, and being influenced by our own brain biases as we are, and being stoked as we are by Hobbes and by Augustine's view of human nature, well, no wonder good people of good intent can set out to try and do the work of building a oneness world, and it still comes to nothing. Well, after I posted about my bumper sticker experience in the parking lot, Kate posted a story of her own. I guess she'd been on a road trip somewhere and seen plenty of bumper stickers as well as signs, as well as flags, as well as all the protests that are going on. So on this long road trip, she said, I got to see all of the division that's going on in our nation, all kind of right in front of me. And she said, I kept reminding myself that those people, they also get up every day with their worries and with their needs, and they love their families, and they want what's best for them, and they go to work, and they make our society run. And they go to work over here, and they go to work over there, and because they do, things that we share together work. And I pictured myself, she said, needing real help from any one of them. Say we had a car accident, or there was some other crisis or an emergency. And I was filled with the sense, she wrote, that they would come to my help, to my aid. They would, without any questions about my politics, without any questions about whether I believe in vaccinations or don't believe in vaccinations, they would come to help me. I know they would. And she ended her post with a prayer, not unlike the one Jesus taught us to pray, for eyes that could see the bigger picture. It was a prayer for curiosity, to see what she had not seen. May I be more curious than my brain biases would dictate. May I be more curious than my negativity bias, than my illusory superiority bias. May I be more curious than my Western inherited view of them and the nature of them. But here's the thing, that curiosity that was part of Kate's prayer, that curiosity is in every one of us. The tendency to see, the ability to see the other as just like us. That trait, that capacity, that quality is also inside you and me. In the 1970s, Richard Dawkins wrote a book, The Selfish Gene. It sold about a gazillion copies. And it painted human nature in very, very dark terms. Innately selfish, brutish. Well, in subsequent editions, he dropped all those assertions about the brutish nature, the selfish nature of human beings, because science had been progressing in a way that made that an untenable view to continue to hold. Because the selfless gene, the cooperative gene, the altruistic gene, the seeing the best in the other gene, that's just as powerful inside human nature, more so, in fact, than our competitive genetic wiring. So that now, every first-year biology student learns that cooperation is even more critical for our genes to be passed along, even more essential for our intrinsic human nature than the competitive genes. So here's one weird example, and that is the whites in our eyes. I think scleria or whatever, the whites. You know from experience that there is something super social about looking into the eyes of another person. Our eyes communicate a tremendous amount about what's going on inside of us. We show it through our eyes. Well, we human beings, we have this weird feature in our eyes. Most mammals only have a little bit of white showing, if any, because they evolved to not have that flash of brightness show that would reveal that they were there in a dark space. They did not want to draw attention to themselves when they were hiding from prey or hiding from a predator. But human beings, we have a lot of that white stuff showing in our eyes so that we do draw attention to our eyes kind of on purpose, just the opposite of what most mammals have. We thrive because we do not hide from one another. We broadcast which way we're looking. We help one another know where to focus by revealing it through our eyes, which means that we are often looking at one another's eyes. We are often zooming in on what's going on with the eyes so that we know how a person is doing. We often pick up those broadcasts from one another about what is going on inside because we often make eye contact. So our biology kind of made us open books to one another. We broadcast our purpose, we broadcast our intention, and we broadcast our attention. We are ultra-social animals. We leak out what's going on inside of us, our internal emotional state, all the time. Matter of fact, we have to work really hard to not do that. We're kind of taught to not do it, but we have to work hard. Our natural state is to broadcast what's going on inside of us. Our ultra-sociability is how we survive. We're born to bond together. We're born to play together. We're born to trust one another. That is also inside of us. And it's inside the other. So when the spiritual tradition encourages us to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, to even love our enemy, and it encourages us to go into that place inside of ourselves where we can find that capacity, the encouragement is there because the capacity is there. We can do this thing. There's a reason that Kate knows that those people would stop if she was in a car accident. We know that because we know human being. Brain biases notwithstanding, Thomas Hobbes notwithstanding, Fox and MSNBC notwithstanding, the other is like us. The other is good like we are good. And though our brain filters that goodness out, which it does, that goodness exists in me and in you and in them. The other has the same ultra-sociability that we do, has the same wiring, has the same primal desires that we do. We are more one than two. And curiosity about the other, that's about all it takes. Just curiosity. We have to not let our thinking shut down because our brain biases want to shut our thinking down. We have to not default to our biases because our brain wants us to be defaulting to our biases. We have to instead get curious, wanting to know. That's about all it takes. Get curious, and then we get to know. Get to know, and then we begin to discern what's actually going on, that we are like one another. We just are. Now, next week, I'm going to tell you a really important story. I think it's important in historical terms about how South Africa avoided the war that so many African nations did, because it's going to highlight an important dynamic, and that dynamic is the proximity principle. And that is that when we are in close proximity to the other, we find our way into this kind of curiosity. The problem is our society has configured things in such a way we are not. We are not in proximity to one another very often. So that'll be next week. But this week, in Dwelling Divine, May we be a curious people. May our curiosity move us beyond the impediments and the obstacles, the brain biases, the cultural norms. May we be a curious people. Amen. Well, if you're online or if you're here, let us prepare our offerings. And as you do, remember what I say all the time, that an investment in spiritual community returns powerfully on our investment. Every time we put in energy and time and love and dollars, we put it into community, what comes back to us is amplified, because the spiritual community turns that around and gives it back to us, creates a space in which we experience transformation. Now, Scott has mentioned in our last few financial reports that we've been coming under budget for 3 or 4 months now. For most of the pandemic, we've done pretty well, but lately, not so well. He's holding judgment back because sometimes November and December are really good months for our community, but if they're not, then we'll have to make some hard decisions when it comes to January. Also, I've been looking at places that we might go. Carrie's been helping me find places, and I've been going in and seeing other places. And, it looks like we've got good options available to us, but those also are going to cost some monies in terms of what it will take to move from one place to another. So, an investment in community, it's a good return. Now, in a moment, we're going to dismiss the folks on the live stream, and we're going to then get some food, have a Thanksgiving brunch together, and I've got some questions for us to talk about while we're eating together. But for those of you online, hey, I think I might have a third, so we're almost to the place where we could start What Are You Thinking on Zoom afterwards. So if you would, let's dismiss the live stream folks by putting our hands on our heart. And let's remember as we go that we are, every one of us, carriers of the indwelling divine. Love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, what we call the fruit of the Spirit, is within us because we carry the divine light within us. And if you would extend your other hand to our city, let's look for opportunities to share what's in us with the people that we live and work and go to school with, looking for opportunities to repair and heal our worlds. Amen. God bless you all. You are dismissed. Those of us here, let us pray a prayer of thanksgiving. Divine, we are grateful for the food and the